A minute. Yes, we are live.
Hello, everyone. My name is Esther Mweni. I'm here today. We're going to learn how to learn. Alongside me is Velda Kiara, the lead of She Code Africa, Nairobi. And we have our speaker today, Odero Oluoch. Odero is the founder of Andishi Africa. He's also a software developer and is a student at Moringa Schools. And he will be taking us through today's session. I hope you are all ready to learn. So, Odero, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Esther. Thank you, Velda, for this opportunity. Thank you, all of you. It's nice to have you here. So I don't know, I should just start right away, or is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. So
Yes.
allow me to share my screen because everything I have is on a presentation. Just allow me to share my screen. Good. So I'll start by telling stories a bit, stories in bits that do not really make sense, and hope that at the end of this session we'll have made sense out of them and actually come up with something. So the topic of today is learning how to learn. And we all know that we are in a time where there is a lot of information. Things that we used to go to dig, things that we used to go to find in books, in libraries, are now available to us from just clicks away. And this has presented a big problem to us because then it's a lot. It's a lot to consume in a very short period of time, and there is a lot of it. And so we are not sure of how do we get to filter which is right and which is wrong, and how do we get to progress and move with the growth in technology. So let's shift to story number one. So who is Odero Oluoch? I consider myself a student of life. I consider myself an individual who is always curious about what is happening, where and how. And that is why I'm here trying to, attempting to give my own version of learning how to learn. How did I find myself in this space where we are learning how to learn? First, I took a Bachelor's of Science in Information Science at the Technical University of Kenya. I specialized in one branch of information science called knowledge management. Here we look at knowledge, organizational knowledge, from the technical organizational knowledge, what we now call big data, to the soft organizational knowledge, the knowledge that is held by an individual staff. Let's say someone dies and you get another staff, but then this one that is replaced is not as good as the one that died. So knowledge management tries to see how then do we tap this knowledge from this individual so that it can be passed on from the next staff who may be coming, or it can be put into the practices of the organization as part of policy, or as just practices that the organization can adapt. While doing my research, my final year research, I studied something called learning methodology. We we are all familiar with our normal classroom methods, where a lecturer comes, talks to the students, gives notes, students take notes. At the end of the class, there is either a test that is done, administered on the students. At the end of the class, there are either quizzes that are given, and then we assume that students have learned. So I was intrigued by a very interesting way of learning called the inverted classroom, the flipped method of learning, where you start from the end. Like, okay, let us first test you. What do you know about this topic before we start learning? How familiar are you with what we are going to talk about? Do you have any related knowledge? Do you have any form of exposure to this thing? Then let us discuss what we will expect you to learn. Let's say we are talking about, let me give a practical example. Say mathematics, a very simple mathematical concept. So what do you expect to do? How do you expect to implement this? In what instances? Then once we have done talking about what is expected, we now let you go through the content. After you've gone through the content and dived through it, you're given tests, practical tests, and you take a look at it, then we now test you. So what do you know? How did you go about the tests that were given unto you. Why, after I finished my undergraduate, with that research that I did, I found myself in a very interesting space. It's called the G United program. It's a program under the Ministry of Education, administered through the office of the Vice President, the Deputy President. So while here we are called the Volunteer Graduate Assistants, I was posted in a school called Mashuru Boarding Primary School. And here we were supposed to promote literary skills amongst pupils of grade 2 and grade 3. I love to read. That is why I found this fun. Though my background was in tech, something technical, information, science has a bit of technical aspects, but I found myself a bit free in this space. So while I was here, we were given a framework of how to teach children. Children in grade 1 and grade 2 and grade 3 are very curious people, and their attention is this short. Like, you'd have them listening to you 1 minute, the next minute they're doing their own things. And if you're not interesting enough to them, they won't even want to look at you again. So while I was teaching these children, I learned a lot about myself, a lot about the learning process, and a lot about what goes on in the mind of an individual who is learning. We were given a framework of how to help these kids go through what we were taking them through. Step 1 was simple: read for the child. Make sure you're reading and the child is listening. At this stage, you notice students take keen attention of different things. While I'm reading, one child is really paying attention to my lips. The other one is really paying attention to my eyes. Different things get them. At the end of the day, they are familiar with what you've explained. Step 2 was read with the child. Step 1 is read for the child. Step 2 is read with the child. Read along. Let the child read while you read with them. Step 3 is let the child read. And then the final step is repeat until there is some form of familiarity in this thing. While learning with these children, I found myself also in the process of exploring my own learning capabilities. I started looking at our education system. Very few spaces do we find instances where before kids learn, they're actually told to think about themselves learning, to provoke the brain to be aware that, hey brain, you're supposed to be consuming information. I started looking at what we study all the way from primary school to university and even post-university education, and what we have missed in this thing. My attention was drawn to mathematics as a subject, and I realized that math is supposed to teach us something we call abstraction. Maths is where we are supposed to be taught how to solve problems. A huge problem brought to us, and then it is upon us to break it down into small, tiny, doable parts. But did we really get this? Did we at any point see mathematics as a key to problem solving during our education system? So fast forward to now my journey as a student. I finished my program at G United. It was a 1-year experience, then came back to Nairobi. Hustling here and there, I found myself in a position of a tech support at a company, an upcoming company in Kenya. So I didn't know how to write code much. I had an idea from what we were taught in school. I had developed a Java application through YouTube tutorial. I had done a few Laravel applications, and I was not really sure. If you let me do something on my own, I really couldn't. So my boss sent me a book, PHP and MySQL for Dummies. I took it as an insult at first, but then I read the book. Started from the first page, went through. I could not understand anything. My boss would come in every day, give me tasks to do. I was brought in as a support. I was to support a system that was already developed. By then, there was that window of teaching yourself to write code as you go. This was in 2018. It was a tough time for me. I couldn't get what was happening. I couldn't really put these concepts together. I could not understand how one related to the other, how writing a line would affect something on the screen. It didn't make sense. I would watch things on YouTube, but then when asked to really make it work in the way that it was supposed to work, it was not working well. Towards the end of my contract with these guys, my boss sent me another book, Clean Code. This made things worse. Clean Code is supposed to teach you how to write code effectively, assuming that by this time you already are familiar with certain elements of writing code. I think I got into a mini depression. But then with the little knowledge I had learned out of this, I applied for another job. I was called for a tech interview. It's a really prestigious company. There are two people who were interviewing me. One was from Nigeria, the other from Ghana. It was via Zoom. And so they asked me the first question, I answered nicely. They asked me the second question, I answered nicely. Now, as they went on to the next level, my mind just shut down. I couldn't get what was, I could not answer. They asked me very technical questions I didn't know. What was polymorphism? How do you implement polymorphism in this concept? How do you get this working here? And I just could not. So I decided to take this chance and turn the tables. And now I decided to be the one asking the questions. Told them point blank, my people, where you are, I am not. What you know, I do not know. Tell me, what do I do here? How do I learn these things? How do I get myself in a position where I can confidently talk about things? Because the guys were explaining to me what they've done. You know how an interviewer is trying to make you feel comfortable? They were explaining to me the things they've done. They were explaining to me how they got themselves where they are. And I felt, how do I get myself to where you are? So they gave me a few tips. They gave me links to a few YouTube channels, gave me links to a few Udemy courses, gave me blogs that I could follow. And immediately I ended that Zoom call interview. I went and resigned from my current work and said, from today on, I am learning and nothing is going to stop me. That got me into a pool of mistakes, a pool of very, very many mistakes. Amongst them, I have made 5, of which I would like to discuss and share. While sharing this, I would telling you about my journey. I would then be shedding light on a few things that I thought or I think would work better. So step 1, I did not know what I did not know. Honestly and sincerely speaking, I'm just from a job interview and they've told me I don't know code. What am I supposed to know? How far am I supposed to go? To what extent am I supposed to study this? I went on Google and searched what I need to understand. What concept do I need to understand computer science? I met something else, discrete mathematics, okay. Algebra, okay. So how far do I need to go with these things just to understand how to write code? I made a list of what to do. 100 days of discrete mathematics. Every day for 2 hours, I'll be studying discrete math. While doing this thing, I figured that I had a pool of resources. I had Udemy courses to study. I had YouTube tutorials that I had already put in line. I had projects that I wanted to build. And I used to wake up very early at 5. From 5 to 6 to 7 was dedicated to Android app development. I would take a 1-hour break. From 8 to 9 to 11, I'd study discrete math. Take another 1-hour break. In the afternoon, I'd pick Python, study for 2 hours. And then all these things were just put at random. There was no structure. There was no end goal. I just wanted to learn so that at the end of that 1 year, I would stand up in front of people and say, I have developed in Java. I have developed, I have an app I built recently. You see how people are experienced stand up and then talk about the products that they've built, talk about the things that they're working on, how they've put this on Docker here and that is running there, and you feel, how do I get there? So that is what I wanted. The third mistake I made, this thing I hear everybody says, if it works, don't touch. Keep in mind, I was following YouTube tutorials. I would follow keenly through the guides. And I think my mind was starting to pick up some of these concepts that I would walk through the errors very smoothly. And this YouTube tutorials has a lot of hand holding. And then, you are building Uber clone, and you build Uber clone until it works. Okay, then what next? Tomorrow you're building a YouTube clone in React.js. You build a YouTube clone, then what next? It brought me to this point of, okay, what if I wanted to do something different? What do I do? Always I had that fear within me that if I try to change something and then it messes up everything, I would have ruined my project. I would have ruined my very polished projects to put in my portfolio. I would have destroyed the journey that I had started, this move of one step at a time, gradually building myself. And at the end of my 6 or 1 year goal, I should come out a hero. The fourth mistake I feel I made was this. I felt that I knew much already. Nothing was going to shake me. People would advise me, oh, go try Code Warriors, go try HackerRank. Why should I test me? And yet I have a complete product I made that is working. Why should I do that? And on to my last final mistake that I've put here is the fallacy that I have watched that tutorial. Why should I watch it again? Give me the next one. I have looked at that material. Why should I look at it again? Give me my next one. With all this in hand, it got me to a point where I was not going anywhere. I was not growing. I got a chance to join Google Africa Developer Scholarship. I didn't make anything out of it. It was a whole wasted time because I have everything here. I have a to-do list that is full of things. I have project portfolios that I can't explain, I can't change. I can't even tweak the code to do anything different. I have all this time, all these resources, and nothing out of it was making me feel any better. If I were to go back to the same interview panel again, I'm so sure they'd ask me the same questions and I'd still get stuck. So look at me. I am from teaching children, and children actually learned to read, and parents gave me gifts for making sure their children learned to read. I was even recognized amongst the best. To here, unable to teach my own self, unable to grow me out of my own situation into a better version of me that is able to understand code. So I took myself back and sat down and wondered, okay, what is going on here? How do I get myself to learn how to learn? How do I put myself in this motion where when something comes up, I am able to put myself into its context and grow with it as it moves? I got curious and started understanding how the brain works. This thing almost got me into neuropsychology, neurons and psychology, and allow me to take a sip of water. Thank you. So I started looking at how the brain works and how the brain retains what is given to it. Different analogies. I ended up bumping into different analogies. I ended up looking at this concept in different ways. One of them is what is called the pathway. When you're learning something new, your brain will first look at any other things in your brain that is already almost related to that concept. Brings me back to my research that I did at undergraduate, the flipped classroom of learning, where before you start learning a concept, the teacher first asks you, how familiar are you? What do you know with this? The more you learn this concept, the more the pathway becomes clear, the more the connection is established. So then, if I ask you a question about point A, while you're remembering point A, point B, C, D, and E that are related to what you're remembering are brought up, and then it gives you a richer experience or a richer knowledge base of this. When you're writing code, or when you're learning code, or when you're just learning anything, how then do you make sure you first start with what you're already familiar with? What if you're completely new to this concept? How then do you establish a pathway between what you know and what you want to know, so that there is continuity in your brain cells? Imagine yourself in an interview room and you're asked a question. How does the brain give you the answer? Or is it you that gives the brain the answer? What really happens? Are we able to separate me, the voice in me, and the brain that is supposed to be the custodian of all these questions that these people are going to ask me? And because you remember something, does that really mean you know this thing? This is explained through a very unique concept. Before we got into this age where information was everywhere, there were those who really knew things, and they'd be paid to talk about what they know, or they'd be paid to go and give consultancy services. But we're at a time where if I'm stuck with code, I can simply Google and get the answer. We're at a time where if I want to do something, I already have somebody somewhere who has done it, or who has some form of a boilerplate, or who has some form of a structure that is almost already made. If I can develop a web app using Python Django, and someone else is able to do the same with Python from scratch, why would I need the Python guy and I can do this the other way? Is the fact that I know something putting me at a better position to grow, or to move, or to transit smoothly in this learning age? While learning how to learn, while considering how the brain remembers, while trying to find out what really goes on in the brain, I got three very important concepts, or three very important key pointers that I would like us I'd like to share with you today. The first one is what we call attention and retention. And this is a bit self-explanatory. Anytime you're paying attention to something, there are high probability that your mind will retain. But there is something funny about this. What does the brain remember? What does the brain capture? Does the brain capture a paragraph? Does the brain capture a story? Does the brain remember things that you write? The way they say you write it down, it gets to your brain. I came to learn that brains remembers mostly two things. One, images, pictures. People who have photographic memory have a higher chances of getting themselves through the learning process better than those who don't. The brain remembers keywords. If I give you a word, like for example, let's say you went through an experience in life, and then you went at an accident, you had an accident, and then someone was shouting a word during the time that the accident was occurring. So if someone mentions that word in a different context, your brain will most likely remember. So how do we relate this to code? How do we bring this down in a space where we can be able to use our attention to get more retention while learning this? Number two, emotion and memory. I'm trying to relate this with me. I am so sure if I hadn't been through these tough times where I was being told I don't know how to write code, where I went through a very tough interview process, my memory wouldn't be that keen on some of these things. It's like what they say, that the toxic ex is remembered more than the good boy. And there is a way the emotions get ourselves into learning mode, get ourselves into making it to the next step. Some people wake up very early because of things they go through in life, or the kind of background of the poverty levels that they have at home. And so they tell themselves, I must study hard to make it to the next step. But how do we bring this to tech? How do we bring this in a tech space, a space where we want to learn about technology, and we don't have much emotions involved around writing code. We don't have much stories of what we are doing and how this relates to the actual things that we're writing. The third thing that I gathered about the brain is that the from zero to hero thing is a fallacy. It is a lie that we tell ourselves every day, that today, if I start from here, tomorrow I'll be a hero. It's the way people go to a race. If you see how people go to a race, they start at some point and then they run and then they run and then there is a finish line. In this space, you may start today, but when you see the finish line, you'd be surprised that the finish line has been moved. If you try to go harder, get to the finish line will be moving the sooner you get to it. I went and did my research on the best ways in which we can have these 3 key pointers that I've put across and package them nicely into a way that helps us in code. I got this information from a course I attended. It really got me thinking of how things work while we're learning. While learning, to the best of my knowledge, there is what we call the information track, the skill track, and then the innovation track. I'll start from the farthest, the innovation track. Who is an innovator? What do we think when we hear of someone innovation? I'm not sure. Can I get the audience to say a thing or two? Esther? Hello, Esther?
Hello. No, unfortunately they cannot, but they can make comments through the YouTube chat area.
Okay. So I just keep on going.
Yes.
Okay. So let me just share my screen one more time. I hope my screen is back.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So an innovator is someone who picks something or an idea that is already working and shifts it to do something different, or shifts it to do something in a way that it was not doing before. How about someone who is skilled? Someone who is skilled is an individual who, to the best of his knowledge, has some set of practices that can be put into use to make things work. I'm trying to use the simplest language here. And then what is information? Information, from what I was told in information science, is just pieces of data that make sense. Pieces of data put together that make sense. Let us go back to my story where I was learning how to learn. Immediately I had walked out of that interview room. I went and picked certain materials that I wanted to use to learn. I went and picked materials that were very specific to a very specific language, to a very specific way, build a specific product. I have come to learn that for an individual to really make it in the tech space, to really grow, the first step, you have to be really informed. You have to get information. What is this information about? This information is about what you're going to learn. If you want to learn computer science, I would advise that you don't go and start learning Java or learning Python. You put yourself 1,000 steps behind and ask yourself, what is this thing that I'm getting into? What is computer programming? What is software development? I am advised that this should take about a month or 2 or 3 if you're comfortable enough. That during this time, you look at the key concepts around software development. How does the computer keep information? How does the computer get information? How does the computer manipulate information? How does it store? From a general perspective, what is abstraction in software development? What is polymorphism when when building a system? How then do you architecture a system? How do you deploy a system? How do you put this system to run? during the information track, you're doing what we call mind mapping. Your mind is able to run around all these concepts from a general perspective without looking at any specific code, without writing any code, without looking at any specific language, from a very generalized point where you get the theory behind these things. You get what informs an individual to implement one concept over the other. At what point would I need to go with an array? At what point would I need not to go with an array and pick another data structure? You get the theory, or maybe sometimes even the history around some of these things. While I was doing my research, I bumped into the story of this man called Henry Bull, and I think that has really given me some form of attachment to this person. And anywhere there are Boolean values, I find myself in a way excited. These very little things. So the information track is the track where you gather information about computers, about systems, about programming, about the internet, how the internet communicates with a device, and how a system in some cloud is able to work, how you maintain speed, and some of these things. The information track is set as the foundation of learning. It is where you guys in the building and construction industry would say that a strong foundation will always give you the best moving forward. In the information track, one thing you should keep in mind is that the cost of learning is time. And the more time you spend on the information track, the more your mind gets familiar with what you're learning. You remember how I introduced the pathway? That when you introduce a new concept when you introduce a new concept, your brain creates something called a pathway. So there is a path that is linked from an existing cell into the one that you've created. And when you go on digging deeper in the information track, you have many of these pathways. So when you get into the skill track, you're now getting into the specifics of a language. This is where you now, in the information track, you read about arrays. In the skill track, you're now implementing an array in a specific language. If you spent enough time in the information track, while in the skill track, even if the frameworks change, even if they advanced up to a certain level, you will still be able to stay afloat because the abstract value or the foundations of what you learned are very solid. If you spend enough time in the information track, it will be easier for you to spend enough time in a programming language, get comfortable with it, and even shift to another language because the concepts are with you. You have the general theories around this. You have the general, the foundations is laid nicely. Now, the innovation track is where an individual is able to use his skill to create something. There is a word they say, you first imitate, then you mutate. In the skill track, maybe you're writing code written by other people, you're borrowing code from Stack Overflow or from wherever, you're watching YouTube tutorials, people are building projects, you're building along. So once you're able to have this skill, then in the innovation track, you're now able to mutate some of these things. I look at this from my journey where I was given a code to work on and I didn't know what to do. I could follow along a YouTube tutorial, but I couldn't change anything because I feared that what if I change this and then it stops working? Of course, there are instances that I tried and then it messed up everything and then I reverted the changes and stopped at that point. And I think that because of the holes or the gaps I had in my learning, I was unable to practically own the code that I was writing. I was unable to even explain the tiny details of what was going on in this code. And so after I learned and mastered what I was going through, I have spent most of my time trying to dwell more on the information track. I am a student, I'm not an expert. I'm still trying to explore my own frameworks and theories. of how to get this running. So the information track, if captured nicely, if an individual has this nicely, the brains pick up some of this, the pathways are created in the brain. So while you're in the skill track, you find that you're going through or over some of this information that you had already grasped slightly while in the information track. And when you go over them a number of times, the paths are now starting to look well defined. The paths are now starting to be a bit solid, a bit visible. Another thing about this information track, skill track, and the innovation track methodology is that in software development, nothing works in isolation. All of us know that, I hope, that nothing works in isolation in software development. You need to understand a variable for you to manipulate data using a function. You need to have understanding of a function for you to have a product that actually behaves in a certain way or responds to certain things in a certain way. You need to understand internet and internet networking for you to just have a slight idea of HTTP request and how to communicate with other programs outside of the world of your own program. And so this is an advantage to us because that is exactly how our brain works. If you know something and that cell is in your brain and you do not utilize it over a period of time, the brain will let go of that memory. The brain will let go of that piece of knowledge. If you know something and there are other items that are related to this material, the brain will somehow have it linked to one and to other materials, so that when you are referring to one of them, this one also gets excited along the way, and so you keep it awake. Software development has some of these concepts that depend on the other, and you may start from a very simple perspective. They say it never gets any easier. More knowledge piles and more knowledge piles, and there's a lot to know, and then there is a lot to know. But if while you're starting, you have that map of how these things are connected, you have that rough idea of how one influences the other, one affects the other, so that while you're learning concept A, you already know brief ways or just ways in which concept B interacts with concept A. While you'll be learning concept B, you'll find that you will revise some of the things in concept A. While you'll be learning concept C, you'll find that some of the things in concept B and concept A are repeated or are brought in from a different perspective. And in that way, you find that you're climbing the ladder a step at a time. Another methodology that I came to realize can also help us learn how to learn. This is my story. I am just from a software development interview where I have failed terribly. So I come back home and I sit down and I plan what I want to know. While I am planning what I want to know, I have no idea of what I ought to know, of how far I'm supposed to go with this. This is a software development learning journey I want to start. I didn't really take time to understand how does it go? How far does it span? Where will I start and where will I finish? Where will I draw the lines and say, those ones are learned for fun? While I was wasting time doing 100 days of discrete math, of course, it's a very important topic, really important. It helps people. But why would I dig so deeply into it? Well, I would have been spending this time gathering information about software development, about the key concept around software development, and so that when I decide to now get on the skill track, I'd have the foundation nicely. This is what we'd call unconscious incompetence, where you don't know what you don't know. And most of us are really hard-headed at this stage because psychologically they say those who don't know always think that they know. and they're always very verbose and very wordy in what they do. And from what I have discussed, the information track really solves what we call the unconscious incompetence. Because then, when you sit down, say you have a YouTube tutorial that is well curated, tells you you'll start from here and get to here and then to here. The first 10 minutes, you will be talking about concept A. The second 10 minutes, you're talking about concept B. Your mind is already aware that this is what I'm going to gather. This is the what I'm going to learn today. So if you don't get anything, or certain concepts are not well understood, at least you know that concept B I didn't get so well, so I have to go and revisit, or I have to go and learn, or I have to go and think about it in a different way. That is what we call the conscious incompetent, where you know what you do not know. In most cases, or most the mistakes I see most people do, is that they get to learn code and they start by building projects. Good idea. It really works out for most people. It does the miracles for them, because in a way you're getting yourself familiar with certain things. In a way you're exposing yourself. You're getting your hands dirty. But the frustrations that comes out of it, the mental drain that comes out of it when things now don't work, or when things do not go the way you wanted it to go, it is advised that an individual takes time to really understand the foundations, solidifies the foundation nicely. So then you skip the unconscious incompetence stage and get yourself into conscious incompetence. While you're in the conscious incompetence, you get rid of the zero to hero mentality, because then you see that this is the journey I want to get into. Unconscious incompetence mostly fools people that if you just do 1, 2, 3, you'll be good. If you just do a 2-hour YouTube tutorial, JavaScript from beginner to complete expert, you'll be good. You do not know that there is a huge pool of knowledge that you're supposed to get yourself into. And the earlier you are familiar with what you're supposed to know, the better for you. It brings you into a state of conscious competence where you know what you know. Most people who find themselves doing HackerRank tests, doing Code Warriors tests, are testing how competent they are in the things that they know. Most people who are able to debug other people's code mostly are things that they have worked with before, or they are willing to try to work it out, or they are able to, in a way, understand what is going on. Or most people who find themselves in a situation where they're teaching people code, they know you find opportunities like this where someone comes to talk about deploying something on Heroku or deploying something on GitHub. It's something they know. It's something they have done. It's something that they're familiar with. Their mind has walked that path maybe a number of times, or it's something they were digging deep and then they got excited about it and so they decided to share, or it's just something that they picked along the way while they were struggling with their journeys and they decided to talk about it. But one thing you'd know is that they are aware of what they're doing. In an event that code breaks while they are doing this presentation, or in an event that code breaks while they're teaching, they'd be able to take that few steps back, identify where the problem was, understand the errors, and fix it. Unconscious competence is where you know most of these things. And I can call you to help me solve code in a way where, a space where you, let's say something you do not know much about. Like, for example, I'm doing an Android app in Java, or maybe in Dart, and you're familiar with Swift, but you know Swift well enough, you know the basics well enough, your time on the information track was spent nicely, that you'd be able to know that, hey, you're trying to access a variable that you've not declared, or hey, you're trying to maybe to deploy code, and then this is how the procedure is supposed to be, or you're just able to read some errors and understand what's going on. Like, you know some of these things too well that you can actually get yourself in a position of fixing, debugging, or making something work, even something that is closely related to what you know, but not entirely the ones you know. In the information track, most people work differently. Some people would want to read books. Some people like myself, I'm biased for books. I would want to sit down and really dive deep into. Some people would want to listen to podcasts that give abstract information about computer programming. Some people would want to watch YouTube tutorials. Others would want to go paid how do you call them, paid boot camps, or explore other opportunities. Some people would want to have a cocktail of all of this, so that you find time getting through this. If it doesn't work well, try this one. You read a book. If you don't understand a concept in a book, you consult YouTube. You try let's say a Udemy course. If you get a concept isn't sinking in well, you read a book. So it's a pool of different methods work differently for different people, but the baseline is you need time on the information track. You need time to set your foundations nicely. You need time to create these spaces in your brain that will be filled with knowledge once you'll be in the skill track. If someone tells you, let's say you're a complete beginner wanting to learn how to code, if someone asks you, you hear someone giving another a piece of advice that, hey, I want to learn how to code, where should I start? People always say, oh, go to YouTube, start building projects, practice, do this. Good idea, works well, but advise our people to take a step back into what is programming. Take a step back into how does this thing work? What is software development? How do you command a computer to do something? How does computer store this message? How does computer manipulate the information that it stores in its memory spaces? This is always the scariest part. There is ever pressure in the tech space. There is ever a pull and a push from all corners. Every day, YouTube tutorials are released, blogs are released, guides are released, software versions are released. Improvements are made on code, on programs. Every day, recruiters come up with new standards. Every day, things just grow. It's growing in a very, very, very fast pace. That if you need to learn, if you need to get yourself settled nicely, or if you want to move with this journey, get yourself out of the pressure. Put yourself in your own small world, in your own tiny space. Because most of us don't really talk about our failures. Most of us don't really find ourselves in that space where we're open enough to tell guys that this one I cannot do, or this one I did and it didn't work and I stopped at that point. Most of us are always in the hype and in the bubble of wanting to do this, wanting to do that, wanting to get there, wanting to go with people, that it denies us the focus. It denies us the pleasure of just being relaxed and having information dig or get into your brain. It doesn't have to be a whole year you're out of the world. You can just have 2 hours every day, 3 hours every day, 1 hour a week, and dedicate it to out of the pressure learning, where you just deliberately decide that I will sit to get my skill level up on this, or that I will sit to get my foundations nicely on this topic. Even the expert developers, those who are masters in this thing, those who make libraries and the likes, they always set time to read, to find out what's going on. But you'll figure out that theirs is a bit on the top level. Like, they don't have to pick a book about complete beginner. Why would they? And they're at that level. But if you are at the stage where I am, where you find yourself struggling to learn every day, where you find yourself under pressure of finishing, doing things to finish. You want to wake up to do this thing so that you get done with it. It will kill us. It will dig us into depressions and into failures and into things that we don't find pleasing. Yesterday, I went on Google and searched, what do software developers fear the most? Some people fear bugs on their system. Some people fear having systems that will be hacked. Some people fear having a life where they're in a corner in an office and nobody really cares about them, but everybody uses the product that they've made. Some people fear being given a project that they can't do, and then they end up not actually doing it. Some people fear finding themselves in a team where everybody is smart enough and they're the only one who is not, or in a team where he's the smartest one and everyone else is a learner and they don't know what to do. And if you look keenly, the stories of these guys, of how they got themselves here, you realize that they were so much in a hurry to get to a certain level that they left holes in between their learning journeys. And getting away from the pressure gives us the focus, gives us the time, the pleasure to really sit down and let information sink in. Because software development, as people say, is not an easy task. And if you get yourself to understand some of these concepts really nicely, if you get yourself to let the information dig in deep, you will save yourself a lot of frustration. It's the biggest mistake most people make. I made it. I was under pressure to make sure things work in a very short time, pick things randomly without any plan or any structure, and looking at how things work in the industry. I was looking at how the general view of programming languages, computers, and the likes. I just got out of campus, got myself a volunteer experience, came back to Nairobi, got myself a job, then boom, I was writing code. Anytime I got stuck, I didn't even know. Sometimes I couldn't even know what to do, even to start a simple server, a simple Node.js server, setting it up to run, I did not know. So from where I sit, this is one very big thing I see most of us dying into. If you spend some time, just some time getting yourself into the dirty ways of what makes software development, what makes computer programming, what builds the foundation, the theories around software development, then while you get into a specific programming language, you'd find it a bit easier or less bumpy, less jerky than most of us. So if this was an interactive session, I would have asked that we share how we have been learning, and if we have noticed anything interesting or anything new or anything captivating that may influence our future, that may influence our journeys in future. And then we can compare notes and see if how does it work to a complete beginner? How does it work to someone who is generally intermediate, someone who is somewhat familiar with some of this concept? Is there a need to go back and then start looking at introduction to variables? So what is a variable? What is a function? Is there a need to sit down and start looking at what is computer programming? Or do we find it necessary that at the level that you are, you make a list of everything you need to learn or everything you want to learn, then get back into learning them one by one? Does it really work? Is it something that we can incorporate in our learning, in our daily journeys? And does this really carry us through the information age? Does this the few concepts that I've put down, my own journey, my own experience learning code, does this really carry us to the next step? Does this really makes us stay afloat in the changes with technologies, releases of frameworks, inventions and innovations of things that are being put together to build other things. Like machines are now learning how to build other machines, and we find ourselves in a limbo where we don't know where we stand. We don't know where we are in the next 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years. Does this structure of info track, skill track, and innovation track put us somewhere, or does it make us think of learning in a specific way? Do we find value in thinking of software development as a learning process? Like the whole of it is entirely a learning process, because there is a lot to learn. There is a lot to know, and there is a lot to be done. Some people would want to learn little and use that little to do much. Some people would want to learn much and then try the best they can to maximize what they know. Are we deliberate with our learning? Do we learn because we found ourselves in a tech space, and some people say it has a lot of money, and some people say it's the next big thing? Do we have the why of why we are learning? Do we have a structure of what we intend to achieve at the end of our learning exposures? Do we evaluate the materials that we want to go through? Do we ask ourselves, okay, I want to build this, I want to follow this YouTube guide to build this project. Am I learning a new concept? Am I improving on what I already know? Am I just playing for fun? Am I just doing this for fun? Am I just stretching or just showing my prowess? Why am I picking this specific material? And what is the value? What am I getting out of this? Do we evaluate the resources that we look at before we actually get to look at? As students who are continually being bombarded with new information, how do we set our mind to be ready to receive this information in a way that we leave space enough for it to be used and for it to accept more while fueling us into the next step? I made a few notes I'm trying to refer. How do we get ourselves this information that we are sure will not become obsolete in the near future? If I know how to code in a specific framework, if I am experienced in that framework, and then that framework evolves and brings in new ways of doing things, where do I stand? How do I put myself in a position where I would be able to make steps with this framework? Those would have been some of the questions that we would have been asking, and so that we get ourselves up to speed and see if the talk we've shared, the little knowledge I have tried to share today, has really made a difference in our lives. I think that would be the end of my presentation. If we can have some form of discussion around it. Esther,
Hi. So there are still some questions coming in. There's Brenda, it's not Brenda, but Brent's asking on the information phase, is it about learning basics of a language, or?
I would wish to know how familiar Brains is, but the information phase is the foundations. Like you're not looking at any language in specific. You're looking at software development from an abstract view. Like, let me say I want to introduce an individual to a function, an individual who knows nothing about a function. I don't use any programming language, but I make sure the theories around functions are well understood. I make sure what a function does, how to implement a function is known from the theoretical perspective. So then, if an individual now wants to get deep into it, they can pick a specific language to go implement the knowledge that has been shared from the info track. So the info track is generally looking at it from, let's say, we are telling stories about programming language. what would we talk about? If we were telling stories about programming language, what would we talk about? What does a programming language do? How does it do it? How do we manipulate data? What is this? This is an array. What does an array do? So once you have that information clearly understood, then while you're looking at your specific language, let's say you've picked Python, it would be easier for you to implement some of these things while writing code. Now implementing the actual array, the practical bit, now putting the skill into practice. I don't know if that answers the question.
No, probably, yeah. And then, no, Tabi was actually making a comment saying that she started learning through daily exercises, watching videos, reading articles, and Googling stuff. So I also have a question for you. So you mentioned something about fundamentals and how to start from scratch. So what has worked for you so far? Like, is it videos? Is it documentation? Is it both? Is it just articles? Yeah.
There were times I could not understand documentations. Even in my opinion, JavaScript has the easiest to understand documentation from the Mozilla Development Network. I couldn't understand a thing. Yeah, I couldn't get a thing. So it really took me some time to struggle through this thing, because I was trying this out, trying the other one out, trying this out, trying that language, did a few things in Java. If you'd asked me to explain, I couldn't. Did a few things in Python, did a few things. So when I took a few steps back and said, hey, let me look at this. Let me just sit down and try to understand what is going on here. I read books, a few books. I watched a few YouTube tutorials. There was this time MIT released some of the recorded lectures free. Introduction to programming, introduction to data structures, introduction to the concepts behind around software development. And so just sitting down, just like nobody's chasing me, I'm not rushing anywhere. I just want to understand what is going on here. And that really did the trick for me. So I'm still learning. It's a journey. It's a journey. I won't say I'm an expert. I'm still learning, but some of these things are now not as frustrating as they were when I was starting off.
Okay. So I still have a question on the point you've mentioned that they were not frustrating for you. Like they were so frustrating for you when you started. So when you started, did you just jump into like content instead of looking at the basics and fundamentals, or what exactly didn't work for you when you were beginning? Did you have like a background in computer science or in programming basically? Yeah.
I was taught C++ in year 2. I remember I was taught Visual Basic in year 1, and that was a really interesting time for me. I was taught C++ in year 2. By the time I was in year 4, I couldn't remember a thing. So I started off from a purely zero ground. Then I left Nairobi and went to work as a volunteer, a graduate assistant with GUnited. So that was not really a tech space. The technical things we had there were the laptops given to the students by the government, projectors and the likes. So them, they see you as a very serious IT guru because you can have your way around it. But then when I came back to Nairobi, I got this job as a tech support. They want you to grow into a software developer. But then the next day you come to work, everyone around here everyone around where I was working is a software developer. So they expect you to write code. And so they throw it at you like, hey, ABCD, I want this done by this. And so I found myself at a crossroad, like I'm stuck. I don't know what to do. What do I pick? How do I start? What do I do? So after a while, after my boss noticed that I was struggling, he emailed me that book, PHP and MySQL for Complete Idiots, because they were really strong on PHP. And I thought I'd read it to get me somewhere, but then it didn't really work. So got me into that loop of reading this, it's not working, trying that tutorial, it's not working, getting this, it's not working. Of course, I must appreciate that while I was doing this trial and error, I was picking a few things. But then it was only after I took a few steps back and just became deliberate with what I was doing, that I managed to now pick this and just started to work well with it.
Okay. So Onyango, I don't know if this is a question or a statement. So he's saying, what about group learning? That is getting together with like-minded people to help out with morale and also helping you see a different perspective when you hit a roadblock. So I don't know if that's a question or a comment.
I think we can phrase it as a question. It works differently for different people. I have seen people get frustrated because of the community they're with. Like they're wondering, why is it so easy for certain people and it's not for me? And we need to really have a space where I can be honest with myself about my skill. So then I know where I need to change. I think it starts from within. Then when you get into this community, you can now challenge yourself to do things as your mates are doing. You can now challenge yourself, look at technologies around, try things together. Group learning is important. There is a lot of knowledge sharing. There is a lot of knowledge exchange. There is a lot of activities that go on around group learning. It is important, but I would just wish that someone takes that time to look at, what do I know? So then it will enrich your contribution to this team. It will also enrich your value to you. You're not going there just to gain from them. You also have to go and do your assignments and learn something. I see places where people challenge themselves to go try out something they've never tried before, and then they come and present to each other. And while they're learning, they figure out, there are better ways of doing it. There are better ways of doing it. See, that is a really interesting way of bringing this forth. But what if you joined this community with not much experience? I have seen people who have joined communities and they picked up really nicely and they went forward. I've seen guys who've joined communities and they got really frustrated because I think there was that desire to be like others and comparing yourself with others and wanting to do what people have done in years, you want to do in a night. And so I'd say it works differently for different people, but there is that need to really sit down and look at yourself and work on yourself and really improve your knowledge and skill in this. So then when you're stepping out, when you're throwing yourself out there, you're not hit by the waves or shaken by what other people know or distorted by what is happening here and there. So yes, community is very important, but also there is value in learning so that you become you become a vibrant member of a community.
Okay. So far there are no more questions, and unless Esther, you have a question.
Oh yes, I have a question. There's this thing that people call the black hole of tutorials. When you're a starter, when you are new to the whole technical stuff, coding, software development, you don't know what you should learn. You don't know even what you don't know or what you ought to know. And once you start learning, when you start going through tutorials, you find yourself, you are learning stuff, but you don't understand at what point you move from the skills phase to innovation track on how you structured it. Like you don't understand at what point do I need to know that I've gained enough skills that can make me be called maybe a software developer or web developer or something like that. So at what point do you know that?
That is an interesting question. There are different ways an individual can test his own understanding of what he's familiar about. As I had said earlier, as I had asked earlier, does remembering show that you've learned? If let's say you studied something today, but you can remember it, does that mean you've learned? Some people encourage guys to try out building projects. You get your hands dirty, you try building this and building that, but then there is this, can you try changing something? Can you ask yourself, okay, what about this other way? What would happen if I shifted this to work in a different way? Does it break? Okay, if it breaks, are you able to carry it on to what you wanted to do? Because software development is a skill. The only way you can know if you have this skill is, are you able to scratch with it? Are you able to like put it into practice? Are you able to get it going? If you remember the analogy I used of people back in the days used to be paid to do things, but these days this information is all over the internet. So you will find that there are people who, I can give you this, hey, this is how you solve this thing, but you still cannot put what I've given you into practice. You see the way we go to Stack Overflow and find a piece of code and pick certain elements of this code and put it in our own code and it works. Now, there are guys with even such information, they are still unable to pick it. They know, yes, I know this code, I know it does A, B, C, and D, but I am unable to make it do what I want. So in my opinion, when you start off as a complete beginner, you'll find yourself in a pool where you try this, it's not picking, you try that, it's not picking. There is that stage where you now have the command. You now are deliberate of what you're writing. Like, I want to write a program that does A, B, C, and D. You don't have to go to YouTube and say program that does A, B, C, and D. You're able to like be in charge of line 1, be in charge of line 2, be in charge of line 3, and say, okay, line 3 isn't working. Let me go to Google and find out how to get this. The concept of abstraction, where we are told to have a big thing broken down into tiny, small, doable pieces. You're able to pick each piece and you own this piece and you tell it to do what you want it to do. We are told that computers are very stupid. It is us to tell them what to do, and if we don't tell them, they won't. So I think if an individual gets to a stage where he's now in charge, he's now in command of what happens, you're able to direct it to do A and B, and if it doesn't do A, B, you're able to like redirect it to do what you wanted to do in a different way. Then you're starting to get yourself into the skilled track, because you're now able to implement what you know and you make it do what it's supposed to do. That is, in my opinion. Yeah.
Okay. So Carol has another question. With the fast-growing tech world, how do you deal with the pressure and remain relevant?
I think it is important that we run away from the pressure slightly, just for some time, especially for a complete beginner. You remember I spoke of the information track. Information track is difficult it is difficult to really find your way around information track if you still have the noise around you. Because imagine you're studying about something that people started studying in the 80s. Arrays and computer buses have been studied time immemorial. You know, some of these concepts will not change. 100 years from now, hopefully that 100 years from now we'll still have, because computers are also changing, we may have new things, but there are certain elements. A computer will always store data. A computer will always manipulate data. A computer will always give out results of what it's done. There are some of these underlying concepts that will never change. If we have that time away from pressure to just sit down and have these things nicely on our minds, then we will be improving. We will be building on what we know. We will be like, they say the fundamentals track, the information track helps us get the fundamentals. Then the skill track gives us the ability to implement the information that we learned. There is the information track. We are getting some of these things packed together. We are having them stored in our brains. Then the skill is helping us put them into practice. We're now getting our hands dirty. So, in my opinion, if we are to really stay relevant and really join the pressure, or maybe be part of people causing the pressure, is that we have to run away from the pressure for some time and dig deeper into the foundations and get these things solid. Then we can throw ourselves out there.
Okay. So you heavily emphasize on getting to know the fundamentals first before moving on. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I don't think there are any more questions. I don't know if Esther, you have another question.
No. I think is answered all the questions I had.
Okay. So since there are no more questions, I think we could No, there's somebody actually. So, I don't know, Abdinur is asking, I came in late, but how do you stay consistent in learning something from like start to end?
Thank you for raising this. I think it is a lie that you can learn something from start to end. It's a fallacy that you can learn something from start to end. We need to get that out of our mind. We need to have an open space where we allow information to get in anytime, anywhere. I had an argument with my friends. I asked this friend of mine that we look at a beginner-friendly course. It's very beginner, like completely beginner, and they refused. They're saying, why should we look at a beginner-friendly course and we are already no longer beginners? Well, while I was looking at this course, I got a few tricks of how to manipulate VS Code to work to your advantage, because most of these people who make some of these tutorials wants to show off. They want to show off these shortcuts. They want to show off these cool tricks they know. And I picked a few things. And then I came and told them, my friend, sometimes it's not always what took you there that you will walk out with. You may pick something different. And so these people who come with tutorials of from zero to hero, from start to end, they put us in some form of cocoon that if you've walked from step 1 to step 2 to step 3, then you'll be good. And then we throw ourselves out there and then we end up breaking. So in my opinion, I would like to say that there is never a master or an expert or a hero in this space. Every day you have an opportunity to pick something new. You can learn from a complete beginner. There are people who know the fundamentals of computer programming and they've never written any code. Like they know, most lecturers, most university lecturers, these guys, they know all the fundamentals. They could explain and draw all the diagrams and do all those things, but you won't find them in the practice, in practicing code. Do we say they did it from start to end? Do we say where was their end? You get? So
Yeah.
it's a journey. It's you transition from one step to another. You grow. You let yourself let your mind be open. That I'll need to learn A. A will help me learn B. B will help me learn C. Then I'll be able to combine A, B, and C to build D. Then I'll be able to manipulate D to you see, something of that sort. Just playing around with this thing. But I am strongly against the from zero to hero courses and from start to end tutorials and from beginner to master. Personally, I'd really shy away from such.
Yeah. So I feel like we all learn, whether you're a beginner, whether you call yourself an expert. There's something to learn every day, and things change on a daily, especially right now. A lot of things are changing, but learning is something that is going to be constant in this particular field. So you have to always be ready to learn. Yeah. So there are no more questions. So I'd like to end the session here. So Esther was our host. Thank you, Esther, for hosting this session. Thank you, Oluoch, for showing up as our speaker. This session was really educative, and we look forward to probably having you in the future too. And yes, thank you for this session. So thank you also to attendees for taking the time to attend this particular session. So yeah, have a good night, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one as well. Thank you for the opportunity.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.